Awesome. We are live. So thanks everybody for being here. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Shannon. She is one of my favorite people to work with and is a real genius. So today we're going to be diving into all things founder-led growth, but I'll start with a quick intro. Shannon is a fractional CMO and the founder of SSC Consulting. She partners with startups to craft clear messaging, define brand positioning, and establish thought leadership. With a background in venture capital and Series A, Shannon thrives in the messy middle of early growth, designing marketing strategies to scale effectively. She also is very much a founder brand whisperer and somebody who is, sits in that really interesting sweet spot between like thinking about growth from a product lens, thinking about growth from a founder lens. She's just really good at doing it all. And I'm a growth marketer, founder of Polaris, and I love hosting these conversations where we get to talk about questions that founders probably have and may be afraid to ask, but answered by folks who are perfectly equipped to do that, which is Shannon. All right, so let's jump in and start with a little bit of a level set. What is founder-led growth?
Cool. Kinsey, thanks for having me. Also one of my favorite people to work with, so this is a delight. So obviously founder-led growth means a lot of things, right? So a lot of people typically start with thinking founder-led sales, right? So like early stage, typically the founder is leading sales, right? And I think that is kind of an obvious one. But the way that I often think about founder-led growth is really growth through the founder's brand. So some folks don't like that word. That's cool. We can make up a new one. But I think there's this real opportunity to drive growth in your business through the differentiated opinion of your founder, right? So I've done this throughout my career with lots of different executives, but there's a different kind of power when it's an early stage founder that has this like real want to solve a problem for a specific group of people. I do think there are kind of two types of founders. One type that just like really loves building cool tech. It's a little bit harder with that group, but
Yep.
I think there also is this other group, which is where I think this is where like the real secret sauce is, where they're just completely and totally obsessed with solving a specific problem for a very specific group of people. So they are one of the biggest channels, early on in a company's, where you're finding product market fit. There's like all this stuff you're trying to work on. You're like, is our
Yeah.
messaging right? Is it not? It's like, well, the person that should tell that story the most effectively is your founder. So
Mhm.
really being thoughtful and even, may I say, programmatic on the way that you think about this and not having it just be kind of like a afterthought, especially early stage.
100%. You call out a really good point there about the strategy behind it, and we're definitely going to get into that. You also raised a couple of interesting kind of distinctions there between what we might consider a technical founder and the way that they're going to approach founder-led growth versus somebody who's more of that, out front and center visionary founder. And one of the examples of this that I kind of love, even though they're way at a different scale, is the Brian Halligan, Dharmesh Shah kind of dichotomy of HubSpot. Both very forward, but in different ways. And it's
Totally.
so authentic because it's true to them. And it does what good founder led growth strategies should do, which is build trust with people so that they believe that the direction of the company will supports them today and will continue to support them in the future. And to your point, there is nobody better equipped to explain it than the founder. It's
Right.
kind of hard to put that on somebody's plate who's doing everything else, but it is so it can be really meaningful. Um, so I'd like to dig in a little bit to that idea of authenticity and like, if you are more of a technical founder and this doesn't feel super comfortable to you, or
Mhm.
you're more of a visionary founder, but you still don't want to be out there bragging, like how do you balance your personal authenticity with the messaging that you need to do for the company that you're building?
This is the first question I always get asked. And for a little bit of clarification, I actually think that first type of founder I was talking about that just likes to build cool stuff is not actually most technical founders. I think most technical
Fair.
founders are super obsessed with solving a problem for a certain group of
That's a
people.
great point.
There
Yes.
is like a 15% of them just like that, like making cool stuff. And they like selling that stuff. Right. So that is like where I like to make that a kind of distinction is there has to be a commitment to connection with an audience. And that does not mean they need to be super charismatic and like really forward and out there. For a lot of audiences, that actually doesn't work. So if you're selling dev tools, if you're selling to IT, if you're selling to procurement, if you're selling to a non go to market audience, being who you are is far more important. It is also important on the go to market side, but
Sure.
like there are like more bombastic kind of folks on that side. But I think there are what's actually really, really important is, and I think the word authenticity has been like totally weaponized in marketing over the last
100%.
forever years. Um, but I think the other thing about this is your founder shouldn't feel like an extra job to them. This should just feel like they are packaging and communicating their differentiated opinions directly to their prospects and customers in a way that's now being effective, right? So it's all stuff they already know. Like this shouldn't be new things they have to think of. It's just building an actual program so that it's thoughtful and connected to all of the other work you do. And so it shouldn't feel like, I talk about this a lot where people are like, well, we tried founder brand. Like we had someone run my LinkedIn, it didn't work. Or someone just sent me a plan and it just felt like way too much work. Like you and I were just in this conversation. It just felt like
Yeah.
way too much work, right? And they put it all on me. And so what it really becomes is a partnership between, whether it's a consultant or someone internal in your organization, it to partner with you to be able to have you communicate in the way that feels most authentic to you in the channels that feel right to you, the content types, right? Do you love writing long form? Do you like speaking? Do you like short form? Like it should feel good. And then pair that with where your customers are. Call that like a watering hole map. So like where are your customers? And then that's where this like magic starts to begin, right? So I've done this with like CIOs, and what we do is we put them in the right communities. Like they just go into communities of their peers because CIOs just buy what other CIOs buy. That's like pretty much it. So like they got into communities and they created brand like equity and awareness for the company that they were at. And that was a long tail indicator of driving like larger ACV deals because the CIOs were now bought in from the beginning. Like
Mhm.
this can be really strategic if you do it the right way, instead of it just feeling like send your founder to like 20 events and like write some tweets for them. Like that is
Wow.
lost. That it does not work.
No, no, that so clearly articulates the difference between like tactics and strategy. And you're right on that that finding that middle ground between how you want to show up, where your people are, and like which kind of middle spaces are trust building spaces. Uh
Totally.
it's not that easy to do, and there's a lot of bad advice out there. So
Yeah,
I mean, not to ask you any of your secrets because this is exactly what you do and you're wonderful at it, but
it's okay.
where could somebody start, if like what kinds of questions should they begin asking themselves to determine, what the answers to some of those questions? Who do I want to be? Where are my people? How do I show up?
Totally. There are 3 questions, and to be fair, I do this, but, like, it's hard to like, some people can execute this on their own, and I love for
Yeah.
them to, right? Like, I love to just get the one call and just, like, let them fly. It is harder than that
Yeah.
usually. But so there's 3 questions that I always ask at the beginning, which is, what is something in your industry that everyone believes that you think is fundamentally wrong? Like, you can't see it, you don't like it. The second one is, what was the moment that you decided to disrupt your own life to start this business? There's
Mm,
always like between 1 to 5 moments, right? It's never really one moment, but like what was the final like kind of tipping scale? And then the third one is, what are the most common things you talk to customers about that has nothing to do with your product? So, like, what are the most common things, the conversations you're constantly having with customers? And those 3 things can pretty much build a differentiated opinion. Like, you'll
yeah.
start to find nuggets in there. So that's like the way to kind of build your platform, right? Like that is like, what are the things that I believe? Because some founders will say, I'm not sure I believe anything different than anyone else. And
Mm,
then you ask them that question and they have like 10 answers.
mm,
Like they just need to be asked the right question. It's funny, I did this with a founder recently, and he was like,
yeah.
"Well, just which one should I start with?" I'm just like, "Let's go down the list, right? Like, let's go down the list. Some of which may not be relevant, maybe
Right.
too much of a hot take. Maybe you don't want to go out saying, a part of this industry is fundamentally going to die, and no one should have that job anymore. Like,
Right,
okay,
right, right.
we'll ease into that one, right? Like, that's okay. But so there's that piece, and then the second piece is, they all know what they enjoy doing. Like, do you like being on speaking circuits? Do you like writing? Like, what do you do in your free time that you really, not
Mm,
that they have any, but like if you were to have a thought, how do you communicate it? Is it a voice note? Is it like, do you want to post more on social media? You're just like a little like afraid to do it, but like
mm,
you have all these ideas, right? So there's that. And then where are your customers, which is the part that is helpful to have someone else do, which is like,
sure.
or you can do the interviews yourself if you want to, but like, where are they? You may end up with the answer of they go to other brands to learn things. So you're like, well, looks like we're building our own watering hole, right? Like I know we've had that kind of, I know you and I have
Yeah.
worked on a project like that, which is like, all right, so we have to build our own, which is like, how do we build a like a channel that people can come back to me? They know where I am. So like I'll go to events, then I can tell them to follow my newsletter and we're going to start building an owned audience. That's
Yep.
also a great answer. So I think there's certain levels of effort that some of these channels take,
Definitely.
but you also want your founder to start seeing wins like pretty quick
Yes.
so that, and this is not revenue necessarily, like build really clear KPIs that are leading indicators of success. And once you start to feel those, they'll start to get feedback from their peers. They'll start to see
Yes.
like the board starts to see it. Like that's where you know you're going to get the momentum to build a
Love
program that
that.
will last a long time.
Love that. And those KPIs, like that's a big question. How do you measure
Yeah.
when this is working? Are you looking at things like how many, new followers, new subscribers, new whatevers, or are you looking at inbound seeming sales requests that are based on like do you have any that you almost always recommend versus is it pretty much always customized for the brand that you're working with?
I would say there's buckets that I often recommend,
Mm,
right? So there are leading indicators at the beginning, which is
mhm,
like I talked to someone this morning, they're selling to an IT audience, right?
mhm,
So the biggest problem they're having is even getting to the audience. Like they
okay.
can't get to them. So I was suggesting that as they build, they're actually building this for their like VP of IT.
Right.
So it's actually slightly different than their founder because their founders have transitioned out. Um,
Awesome.
so can they connect their VP of IT? Can they engage that person with 10 CIOs at target accounts this quarter?
Oh, okay.
So that is a leading indicator to revenue,
Sure.
but it is like really long. They also have a really long sales cycle. They have like a 9 to 12 month sales cycle, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's not really long depending on who you are, but not
Yep.
between,
But it can be.
yeah, yeah, it can be. It can feel long. Some of them are more like 18 months, the outliers. So that's a really good leading indicator that this program is driving engagement with the right people, right? And then you can start to say, all right, how many of those CIOs are at companies that we're able to accelerate deals at? Like, do those deals go faster?
Mm,
Like,
mm,
do they? So this is a
interesting.
commitment, right? Like, this is a long, but I also think there's not a lot of loss in doing this work because you know you're
No.
getting in front of the right people. So unless you're doing it with the wrong messaging and like not present, because there is a lot of brand damage you can do if you're not, if this person's not really bought in and not really communicating your values effectively. But yeah, the person I was talking to this morning, I said, when I've done this historically, we found that those deals actually went from 9 to 12 months to 6 because this
Wow.
person that was a blocker historically is now a champion. And so there are
So cool.
possible like long-term effects of something like this. But obviously you have to have some patience there. So the other thing you
Mm,
can do is like sometimes there's inbound DMs. So if you're building like a social program. Something I've seen
yeah.
before is like, wow, we got like 3 DMs to learn about our product this month on her channel where she's never gotten any before. Right.
Mm,
So that is like not necessarily resulting in revenue just yet, but like interest clearly.
yeah,
Or
definitely.
others can be like growth numbers. So if you are building like a membership kind of model, like a newsletter or something like that, you do obviously want some growth numbers, but you're
Sure.
starting like the benchmark is kind of zero. So it's kind of hard to
Yeah,
tell. Right. So
for
build
sure.
those along the way. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I love the idea of acceleration as one of those things that you can look towards. Yeah, that you did raise a point that we have gotten questions about, which is the idea of brand damage. And how do you think through that? Because we've all experienced it, either hopefully vicariously through somebody else,
Yeah.
but yeah, how do you help mitigate the potential risk of a founder being front and center on behalf of a brand?
I think the biggest thing is really focusing on the differentiated perspective in their platform. But if your founder's a risk, they're always a risk, whether it's in a board
Yeah.
meeting. or it's like publicly, like they're gonna say what they
Yeah.
say, right? And they are who they are. And I think if it's they feel uncomfortable and they accidentally say things like and they regret it, that's different, right? Maybe public speaking is not the right channel for them. Like they just aren't like and you
Right.
can learn that quick and pull back, right? Like that's totally okay. I have had some folks that just only like pre-recorded things. They're like, I can
Okay.
do webinars, but I will only do them pre-recorded. Or actually worked with the president of a college once. This is back when I did like classic PR. And she used to make me come into every interview with her because she said she had anxiety induced amnesia. Like she literally would like be in the middle of an interview and just like forget the name of the company she worked at. Like she
Whoa.
could not like and so she would make sure that someone was with her all the time to make sure that like just in case she like made a really like she literally sometimes would say she worked at the wrong place. Like she just could not like
You just
she just
black
couldn't
out.
do it. Yeah, she would just black out. And so she was an excellent speaker, which was the funniest part, but she just like so you kind of just have to figure that stuff out, right? And hopefully work with, that's like back old school journalism and journalists were not the kindest. But it's like in terms of like being understanding if someone makes a mistake. But now it's like you have a lot of power over your channels, right? So if you're
Yeah.
not sure, make sure you kind of have some editing opportunity. But also, I don't know, engagement's engagement, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
These days, I can't tell,
That's fair. That's fair. That's
Another
fair.
conversation for
And
another day. But
another conversation for another day, and we're not getting into politics today. I
no,
can't handle it.
no, not
So,
today.
um, question we've got quite a few really good questions.
Cool.
So I want to take a few more to get through what we talked about before, but then I have some from the audience. So um, I think one that you and I have chatted about a little bit, which is like what kind of challenges can you expect as a founder exploring this? Like, what should you know going into a founder-led growth initiative?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is like you're not going to get a six-figure deal immediately from investing and posting on a channel, right? Like I think it
Yeah,
is something you have to believe in. And
yeah,
that's the biggest thing I suss out with anyone that comes to me to want to do this is like what is their why? And like one of the clients I work with right now, he fundamentally believes that this is the right thing to do and he's like ready and game for the build, right? And I think that is what you look for. And it can feel a little challenging at first, and I think the biggest thing is communicating a lot with the person you're working with to build
yeah,
this about what you need.
yeah,
So if it's not working, then say like, "Hey, I actually really need to meet him like IRL once a week, and like maybe I can just talk at you and you can write." I'm like, "Great, no problem." Or this is the only actual writing I still do because I do like it. But or sometimes they're like, "Hey, I actually would rather like you just leave me alone for a few days. I'll give you a bunch of notes, and then you can just make something out of it." Great.
oh,
So it's making sure you work with someone you really trust. I'm bringing on a new client at the beginning of next year that she was like, "I feel like I'm hiring a therapist." I'm like, "A little bit." like
a
like
little
you
bit.
are gonna talk to me
It's a
about things that are personal to
translator,
you. Yeah. And
definitely.
so and you have to trust that person. And that's why also like I do these month to month, right? So if they're
Right.
not working, it's not necessarily doesn't mean I'm bad at my job. It doesn't mean you're not good either. It might just mean you need a different fit. So
Yep,
yeah, could
definitely.
be challenging, but
That makes sense. And I mean, to be honest, it is a little bit of a muscle that you build. Like
mhm,
any habit or I mean, you get better at it the more you do it. And in some
yep,
ways, founder-led growth it's not the same as personal branding, but it has some overlap. And
for sure.
the simple fact of like getting comfortable with the messages that you want to be known for and showing up with them. It's not easy the first time, but it gets easier every little time you do it, and it does start to be less intimidating, particularly if you are maybe worried about the risk exposure you may be creating, or a little bit more on the shy side of things. Then you kind of have to be ready to be a little uncomfortable, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah,
It's
just
going
like
to
you
be
were
worth
the
it.
day you decided to quit your full-time job and start your own company, right? Like
Right.
these people
Exactly.
have it in them. These people have it in them, right? Like they've already taken on like the biggest risk there is, right? Like there's no
Right.
like I
Yeah.
think that's just a reminder of like you already did the thing. Like now we're just trying to build the thing, right? And so
Exactly.
I think it's just a reminder that they've already done it, right? It's just communicating it in a new way.
100%. So let's get into one last question. Do you see burnout as a risk in this at all, or not really?
I don't know if I'd call it might be like creative burnout.
Okay.
It's this idea that, like, you might be like, "I'm kinda out of ideas." Like, I don't have you see this all the time with creators. Like, we're seeing it a lot, like, now with creators that have been on platforms for, like, 5, 10 plus years. They're like, "I have no more videos to make. Like, I have no more topics to talk about." So, this is where it's like, how can we repackage and all of the things that you've said already, and then how can we get you re-inspired? Like, typically, it's just talking to
Yeah.
customers. Like, founders love that, right? Like, that's why they
Yeah.
built a business. So, like, how can we get you more involved with your customers? Start telling some of their stories if you feel like you're kind of sick of talking about yourself, which is
Yeah.
a totally fair assessment. So I think it's a little less of like actual burnout of like hours worked and more just creative burnout of like,
Hmm.
I feel this way. Like building my own personal brand. Like I haven't posted on LinkedIn in a week and a half because I'm like, I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
don't have anything to say. Like I have no new thoughts this week. And that's okay. Like that is
That's
also, to be
okay.
fair, my program is not programmatic or thoughtful or any of the things that I do for other people. Mine is haphazard, chaotic, and just like to the wind. Um,
It's
but
the old cobbler's son thing. Don't look at how a marketer markets themselves.
no, no, it's scary. And or I'm really good at it when I'm not working with a lot of people. And when I'm working with a lot of people, I'm really bad at it, right? Like, so I think
Yep.
there's this, my husband's an electrician.
Totally.
I just got lights in here and I've lived here for 4 years.
Yeah.
So, there's definitely
Exactly.
um but yeah, I
Yes.
think there's definitely a risk of creative burnout, but I think it can be mitigated for sure. You can always take a break too.
Absolutely.
It's fair.
I can always take a break. There's no you don't have to always do it exactly the same way. So let's move into some of these great questions. One
Cool.
from Nita. I'd be curious to know what the biggest mindset shift founders should embody to maximize their founder-led growth would be.
Yeah, I love that. It's this idea that the way they communicate externally really matters. And I think that they know this, but being a little bit more thoughtful and also understanding that they can help drive revenue, right? They
Mm,
know this in terms of sales, like they get it, right? It's how can we kind of like multiply their impact?
yes.
Um, that's really the shift. And because a lot of them will say, I just don't have time. I'm on too many customer calls, I'm on too many sales calls. It's like, well, look at all the stuff you're learning on those. Can we extract that and spend an hour a week being able to maximize that impact, right? Like outside of just
Mhm.
that one call or that one time. So
Yes.
I think it's like getting them into the macro a little when they're like the most important thing at a seed stage startup is like closing deals and keeping customers. Like I'm well aware that that's your full-time job. So how can we just take a little bit of that out so that we can maximize the impact of it? Not like fundamentally shift the way you do your business. Not looking to do that.
Love that. And such a great call out that as soon as you align what you are like this new feels new initiative that you're doing with the company's goals and your growth goals as a leader, yeah, that it kind of cuts through all the noise of like, oh, should I be doing this? Am I worried to show up this way? Whatever. You're adding value to future people who you are building for, even if they don't know you yet. And I love that idea of just reframing it. Um, all right. So, a question around any, I'm going to just read this out. I'm curious about the mistakes made where, on reflection, a founder saw the tea leaves but didn't act fast enough. Do you have any examples of a moment where, yeah, looks like maybe?
I don't know. Can you maybe you get the context of this question a little better than I do? Like, can you
Yeah.
give an example so I can give a
Yeah,
good one?
it sounds like the question is like a founder sees something on the horizon. They know they believe that it's coming, but they don't take action yet because maybe they don't trust themselves or they don't want to be front and center, way ahead of this kind of challenge that's coming. Have you ever seen that happen? And if you have, you know, how do you help a founder? I'm just interpreting here. How would you help a founder determine when the right time is to speak on something that may be occurring in the future?
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant, but I wanted to make sure I was hearing it
Okay.
the right way. So this is all about risk tolerance. So this is where you're going to find some founders are willing to put their neck out and say like, you know, I know we're not talking about politics, but after the election, like this is what's going to happen. Some founders are
Yeah.
totally fine doing that because you will get feedback on you're dumb, that's there's no way, or like, wow, this is a really insightful thought that I never thought about. You're going to get both. Like there's no
Yep.
question about it. But engagement is engagement and I love to see it. So, but then you also have founders that are like, I just don't feel like taking a stand on that stuff. Um, and I actually think that's okay. Like we don't need
Yeah.
everyone's perspective on every single thing. Like I think it's okay for you. You should have a differentiated perspective on the things you care about a lot and like would love for you to be, I hate the word thought leader, but like ahead of your
Mm,
customers on helping define the way they're building their businesses. Like that is where I think you should focus on having a really differentiated opinion. Um, but also, if you want a hot take, go for it. Like, but you just need to know there is a risk benefit analysis on doing that kind of stuff. Some founders, it's
definitely.
totally a part of their brand to be combative. Like, it is a
Yeah.
part of their brand. You've seen them all.
Yeah.
And they are usually men, sorry. And then there is usually another kind of bucket of founders that are like, I'm not going to be combative, but like, here's what I see. And it's just given in a
Mm,
different tone. Totally fine too. And then there's a third bucket that's like, I just want to talk about my company and my brand and mine stay in my lane, which is fine too. When I
yeah.
build these like brand assessments, I usually say like, what's the way you talk? Right. And there's always like 3 to 4 words of the way we describe kind of like your personal communication style. And that really dictates
Mm,
what you're going to talk about and what you aren't.
definitely. That kind of reminds me of the brand archetype kind of concept that
Totally.
you see in personal branding a lot. Like, are you more of a challenger? Are you more of a, are you
Sage.
like sage? Yeah. And then there's like a magician or something. Anyway, but
Yeah.
not to get too far afield. All right. In your experience, at what point does a good founder pivot their role and let others drive growth?
So I don't think there's ever a time where anyone can impact the direction and vision of the company more than the founder, but I do think there's a lot of like tactical things that can be obviously delegated and scaled. So everyone knows you start to see a pivot where sales should start to be scaled, right? Like away from the founder, where marketing should start to be scaled. You can never take away their personal brand, right? Like that is something
Hmm.
where if you start to get really consistent and like, maybe you can outsource the editing of your videos or like, that you create a newsletter every month and now you feel comfortable allowing someone else like to potentially send that on your behalf. But getting too far away from it, I don't think is ever a great thing. And I think they should always really hold that
Cool.
close. So
Good
um,
call.
that's yeah,
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how a founder's continued involvement in, I mean, Adam Newman's a bad example because it's Adam Newman and WeWork. However,
yeah.
you can't overstate the impact of his influence on
You can't
that
decouple him
company's.
from WeWork. They
It's the
can't. They're
same
not
thing.
decoupled. Yeah,
Totally. And, for most, whether or not the public is aware of it, most companies are like that. I mean, you can't, the founder's so deeply involved in the way that the business, not only what it builds, but how it runs and the culture and everything, that it's either, to your point earlier about maximizing the value of the work you're already doing, it's either kind of you get no leverage from it, or or you can do something with it to build trust with your audience. Um,
yeah. And
all
there
right,
is
so
a way
go
where
ahead.
this can start to branch out to other executives, like when the founder does become more of just a figurehead and less of an operator. Like
Mm,
that's where I do see this being able to scale. Because everyone
mm,
always asks me, like, oh, I don't just want to build my own personal brand. I want to build it for my executives too. Great. At early stages, they often leave. So I like to make sure that there's like large scale equity in the stuff that we're building. But there is a way to scale this once the founder does get really out of operations, but that's usually, pretty far along the line. We're usually talking early
yeah,
stage. So
definitely, definitely. All right, and last question. Well, there's actually two more. Why wouldn't founders be hands-on from Nigel? Is there any reason why they wouldn't?
a lot of it is just they don't know how, like they don't know
Yeah,
why, they don't know what, like the why is always the question I get. Like why,
yeah,
what's the benefit, what's the ROI? That's usually the question.
yeah. And I think we've landed on that. It's clear. It builds
Yeah.
trust. It all of that good stuff. And the last one, one nugget you can share for founders looking to build their brand and grow their business. Kind of. Shannon's ethos.
You have a differentiated opinion if you have a successful company that's growing. So write it down and start to find ways to communicate it that feel almost fun to you. And then start to scale it because there's no
Love
reason
it.
not to do it. Every day you don't do it is a wasted day. You're not doing it. So suggest you
So
do it now.
true. That's so true. You can start now or you can start later.
Yep. The best time to start is last year. So, but the next best
Exactly,
time to start is
exactly.
right now. So
Yeah,
there's that.
exactly right. Exactly right. Well, that's us at 30 minutes. I got to say thank you so much, Shannon. It was delightful as always. And where can people find you if they want to work with you?
Comically, I will be on LinkedIn talking about my own founder brand. That's the best place to find me. Feel free to DM me. I do have a website, but I pretty much just send everyone to my LinkedIn. So Shannon
Great.
Curran. Sweeney is my maiden name. If you see that there too, that is my
Awesome.
middle name. So love to connect with you.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thank you, Shannon. And I think this was wonderfully helpful. And if anybody has questions, you know where to find her. Otherwise, thank you for your time and talk soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.